It's reported that China has become one of the safest countries in the world, with an average of 6.2 murders for every 1 million people in 2016. When considering that there are nearly 1.4 billion people in China, this seems like an impossibility. So how does China maintain a low crime rate while still managing to grow its economy at a considerable rate? How serious is mafia culture at the community level, and how do we assess the political will of President Xi Jinping to rid villages of mafia penetration? To discuss these issues and more today, I'm joined in the studio by Mr. Edward Lehman, who is the Managing Director of Lehman, Li and Xu, Mr. Victor Gao Zhikai, a CGTN commentator and also JD of Yale Law School, and last but not least, Zheng Xi, Associate Professor with the Law School of Beijing Foreign Studies University. We shall also cross over to Mr. Martin Seif, a Senior Fellow from the Global Policy Institute in Washington, D.C. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Gentlemen, do you all agree that China is indeed one of the safest countries in the world, and why?
I think China is one of the safest countries in the world. Of course, everything is relative. We need to really measure the safety by different benchmarks. For example, in terms of gun-related murders, for example, definitely the rate is very, very low in China, mainly because private ownership of gun is prohibited, and also the public security system is well established in China. On the other hand, for example, if we talk about child abduction, then China probably has one of the worst performances among major countries in the world. So I hope our safety rate will be improved, and in certain aspects we can make great progress going forward.
Western perspective would hold. Look, you have the paramount leader, Deng Xiaoping, the late senior leader Deng Xiaoping, who engineered a few severe crackdowns on crimes since the end of the Cultural Revolution. In Chinese, we call them yanda.
Right.
Do you think this has posed a very serious deterring threat to those potential, for example, juvenile delinquents?
You know, I think that those strike hard campaigns, I think they were effective at the time. I think what we've seen now is a crossover to a rule of law, and the rule of law which is then now being utilized through the policing system, and actually what they're maximizing technology in a good way with the police, and therefore they're able to curtail crime. But I mean, having a strike hard campaign, I think, raises the awareness for a particular situation at a particular time. Now I think there's a movement towards all the way across the board. I know there are some anomalies like in child abduction or these other types of things, but I think that there's an overall improvement, just in general by people.
Dr. Zheng, you have done your PhD studies in the United States, focusing particularly on criminal offenses. What can you tell us about the situation you went through there?
Actually, when I was a visiting scholar in UC Berkeley, I went to ride along with some police officers in Oakland, which is one of the most dangerous cities in the United States. And the situation over there is, let's say, terrible, because I saw people selling cocaine on the street. And
in front of the cops?
In front of cops.
My God, and Jesus Christ.
No one cares, actually.
No one cares?
No
cops
one cares.
Don't care?
Yes, because
I can't believe this.
Police officer told me that it is a broken system of the criminal justice, because every time he arrests someone, send him to the judge will give him like a few months sentence. Then after a few months, he came out of the prison, and that's it.
He returned back to the street battles.
Yes, crime career.
What do you make of the scenario in China in comparison with the United States? Do we also have an equivalent of Oakland?
I think in the United States it is well known that the United States has the highest rate of persons locked up in prison. So this is really staggering, and lots of these crimes are related to gun offenses or drug offenses, etc. And I think there are different ways to explain why the U.S. crime rates are so high. For example, it's predominantly immigrant countries. Many people came to the United States without
Are you a
having
fan of racial
found
discrimination against
no,
immigrants?
no. But some of these immigrants, they start without standing on firm footing. Some of them actually drift into gray areas and eventually end up into, criminal situations.
You know,
That's
the irony, though, I mean, just for your edification, is that the only group that has ever been prohibited citizenship to the United States, naturalization, are the Chinese. Probably some of the lowest crime rates probably coming from ethnic Chinese in the United States, historically speaking. So it's not just, I mean, when you were asking Victor about the discrimination about minorities, Chinese are minorities in the United States, and certainly they're not resorting to crime. With regard to what's going on in Oakland and other cities, I mean, Oakland, the mayor of Oakland at one time was Jerry Brown, who's now the governor of California. He was the governor before. There are a bunch of issues where arresting folks, there's such a backlash with regards to the surveillance of what police officers are doing and what the community is protesting about with regard to certain minorities, that it's become very difficult for them to arrest people now because there's a chance there could be backlash within the community. So it's a very complicated situation.
Thank you so much. Let me go to Martin Seif, a senior fellow with the Global Policy Institute in Washington. Hello, Martin. Hello. Are you surprised that China is called one of the safest countries in the world, from your perspective, very quickly?
I am not surprised, but I am impressed. China's size, its population scale, and its rapid urbanization and industrialization should have made that more difficult. But this is a credit to the rising standard of living in China and to China's social model. This is a tremendous achievement, and I do not think it is given sufficient appreciation outside China.
Another perspective, Martin, do you agree that the Communist Party could be very tough on crimes?
Oh, there's no question about that. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Zheng Xi, ideologically speaking, do you believe we are different? Because we could be very tough without the necessary legal policy hearings or legal hearings in the court. Those bad guys would just be sentenced to years of imprisonment. Of course, they would follow rule of law, but the severity of rule of law in China could never be underestimated.
It's pretty difficult to say that, but the situation here in China is that we have a criminal justice system which, let's say, hate crimes, or fighting against crime is their main goal or first goal. The first thing they want to do is to lower down the crime rate, so they will give the severe crimes a severe sentence, but let the people doing misdemeanors, just let them have lesser ones. But the thing is that, in my opinion, the most important thing is that how strong, or does the government have a strong determination on fighting against crimes, and how much resources they can use, they can put into the campaign fighting against crimes. That's the most important.
Prior to the live show here, I did a simple survey with one of my friends who works for the Beijing Public Security Bureau. He's one of the senior guys of the law enforcement personnel. He said, well, one important hallmark of the track record of the local cops here regarding safety and law and order is the degree of people's satisfaction. They often conduct such surveys among the rank and file, the ordinary folks. Their rating about the performance of the police or the law enforcement personnel would be the most important standard for these cops to be promoted or demoted. What do you think of such measures?
I think China in general has very different social and historical and political conditions compared with other countries like the United States. China is a highly regulated society, and the ruling party, the Communist Party of China, is very much in the driver's seat, and they have a lower level of tolerance against all kinds of crimes.
We don't have a competitive democracy. Do you think this ruling party, the Communist Party of China, does have its own strong constituency? and is held accountable for what it does?
I think so. I think while there are many grievances in China, most people are satisfied that there is a very effective ruling party which is dedicated to promoting development, bringing up living standards, and also keeping social stability. This is very important. And I think this partially explains why the crime rate in China is generally lower than other major economies in the world. However, we also have our own imperfections. We have our own areas of problems that we need to make improvements with. And I think with greater entitlements to the people, they may have other aspirations, and eventually...
Well, the common sense is the more cops, the safer. That's what conventional wisdom says. However, in China, Edward, China has been faced with the problem of a police shortage for some time. For instance, Beijing was said to have only 24 police personnel for every 10,000 people in 2016. The percentage, though higher than that of many other Chinese cities, was still low or much lower compared with the leading cities in other countries, for example, your motherland, the United States.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think we have to, I agree with you. I don't think it's necessarily combined or, you know, a touchstone on what the numbers of police per person is. Again, I think it's, you take a look at the society in and of itself. I think that viewers don't necessarily understand about the hukou system, so the family book system. So the majority of people that are living in a community should be from that community based on the ability. You can't freely move from one place to the other. I mean, you can, but be able to live there is regulated. And so I think that makes it so people know one another. In the United States, we don't have that same kind of situation. So, but we looked at the same problem in the United States with New York City. When things were getting very out of control with crime there, they were anticipating that it was just going to continue to get worse. What they found was that it wasn't the police, but it was actually the reduction of adolescence. When Roe versus Wade, which is the court case that permitted abortion to be legal, reduced the number of unwanted children, and as a result, the crime rate went down. It was nothing that they did about bringing in more police. And so here you have the one-child policy. You combine that with the hukou system, the family book, and you've got a situation that is
Edward, we'll come back to examine the issue of a hukou system, which is pretty unique, whatever the controversies surrounding this problem. But the Chinese gentleman here, Edward seems to put his finger on a very important and interesting issue about community service. For example, the Chinese government or authorities at different levels are able to leverage their resources based in community, 社区, or neighborhood community. So the dama, you know, the retirees and you know, women who are held responsible for taking charge of the law and order could help or serve as informants. That's a far-flung network of information, and the policemen must have benefited enormously from their information. What do you think of the Chinese characteristics?
Of course, the interaction, let's say interaction between the public and the police officers help to lower down the crime rate, but that's not the most important one. The most important thing is that although we don't have that many police officers here, like in Beijing or in other cities, but we put a lot of resources into fighting against crimes. For example, we have cameras everywhere in this city. Every corner has camera, and there's a Skynet system in our country. So when you conduct a crime, you will be found shortly. And this deterrence power helps to lower down the
In
crime
Beijing,
rate.
for example, we have up to 30,000 cameras, hidden cameras throughout the whole city. And whether the city could be called a police city or what. Let me cross over to Martin again for his comments. Hello, Martin. You are always on the line. Sorry for keeping waiting, but are you surprised or impressed by the omnipresence of the hidden cameras in the capital city of Beijing? Do you think this is a powerful instrument which helps the cops to achieve breakthroughs in their investigation very quickly?
You're absolutely correct. The United States is moving in that direction blatantly now, but they moved surprisingly slowly. They were slow at first to recognize the importance of closed-circuit television, CCTV. The British did a great deal of work on the French in pioneering this. They found it is also of the greatest value as a deterrent and a tool to detect terrorists. but the deterrent effect for regular crime, as you say, is huge. And I think when you combine that with the leveraging of the community and add the sociological issues, you have the key determinants that do successfully reduce crime very rapidly.
Thank you so much, Martin. In fact, we have a particular saying in China and in Beijing, the Chaoyang Qunzhong, or Chaoyang residents, have jokingly been referred to online as the 5th biggest security intelligence service in the world. That's very surprising. Up next, let's take a look at the vox pop we did in the street before going live on the air about this issue of security record in Chinese cities. Let's take a quick look before we come back and continue with our discussion.
Yes, so far, yes. Personally, I never had problems, so...
Yes, I generally feel safe pretty much anywhere on the street here in China.
Yeah, I feel safe in China. Everywhere is safe here.
Absolutely safe, really. It's amazing.
I don't know, maybe Chinese people themselves, because Chinese people, they're quite calm. So when you're walking on the street, even at the night time, it's still very safe.
I think it's nice that you know there are cameras everywhere. So if people want to do something bad, they will think twice at least. So I think that's a plus. And I feel like the police is always like they know what is happening everywhere. So I think that's really good.
It's hard to say. I guess it's just a feeling that the city gives you. It just feels like, I think part of it is the number of people on the street gives you a sense of safety. And it just doesn't feel like the same level of threat compared to other cities in the world that I've been to.
Because people that we talk here actually really respect women, so that's a really nice thing. Before I come to China, I look for numbers that said about women crimes and things, and they said like Beijing was a really nice place to come because there was none or almost zero. So.
Welcome back, gentlemen. There must be something interesting to explore about why China has become one of the safest countries in the world. For example, let's look at what happens in underdeveloped regions and cities populated by ethnic groups such as Tibet and Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. One thing that we should study as an example is Edward, have you heard of city grid management in China? Its main method is to set up a grid electronic map corresponding the space of the city entity, divide the urban area into a closed grid, then to delimit several control zones according to a set management range. Some people say this kind of management plays a very important role in maintaining public order.
Yeah, no, listen, I think it sounds terrific, and it's a high-tech way of, and it's the way of the future, and that seems the most logical way to be able to break it down into a grid. Again, you know, this is for people's safety, this is for people's security. When we were watching the people and their observation about the safety here in Beijing and again in Chaoyang, which is where we're broadcasting from.
By the way, I live in Chaoyang.
I know, so do I.
In Chaoyang. I should be called the Chaoyang Qunzhong.
So do I. So you and I both. But I think it's the older ladies that are probably acting as better than any surveillance camera as far as the gossip and information that's going to police. But to look at it this way, I think that the grid is a positive thing, and I think that the United States could learn from that. And I agree with what Martin said earlier, which is we're slow to adapt because of the democracy, because of the pushback. But I also think at the same time, we as citizens or netizens, we're giving up our right to be surveilled anyway with our cell phones today. So I don't see that as any big issue. We all know that by having a cell phone, we could probably be tracked by someone.
Whatever happens in China would always be examined through an ideological lens. For example, they would say, hey, the tight control of through the grid electronic map would threaten to violate human rights. Rights activists would say, look, I don't trust you because you are very tough through the eavesdropping, very tough civilians. China is certainly put under scrutiny for the human rights record. What would you say in response?
Well, I would say everything is relative in terms of human rights, in terms of privacy rights. They are all relative. If we look at the United States, ever since 9/11, there have been fundamental changes to how privacy rights or human rights are viewed and protected, mainly because when you have threat from terrorism, for example, an increasing threat, when the public security and safety are being undermined, then citizens probably want to get sufficient amount of protection at expense of certain other things like privacy, for example, or certain searches and surveillances, for example, by the law enforcement agency. This is normal. This is happening in the United States. This is happening to Western European countries, etc. And I think China, given its own very unique and special background, is striking out on its own way. But one thing very important is that social stability is in good order in China, and generally speaking, public order, public safety are well taken care of. This speaks for themselves, and I hope other countries can look at the realities on the ground at the level of feeling comfortable and safe in China.
Yes, indeed, the level
places.
of comfort largely depends on the law and order in Chinese cities. Edward, do you have the feeling that the underdeveloped areas, in Chinese we have 饥寒起盗心, poverty would generate crimes because unemployed people would turn to violence, to rob people, to gather money illegally. Do you think this is likely to happen in, for example, Dongbei, the 3 underdeveloped provinces of China, where you hardly find any investment? 投资不过山海关, people hate to make investment beyond the Shanghai Guan to help develop the economy in Dongbei. Therefore, crimes could be one of the most important and embarrassing problems.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, but compared to some place like the United States, when we talk about Oakland, the professor had talked about that earlier, which is that in any city in the United States, even in Washington, D.C., there are certain areas that are dangerous. I mean, and that's the one thing I think Chinese who go to America, sometimes they're not aware that there are areas in every city that are dangerous. You cross from one street to the other, and you can only really know it if you're part of that community. What I'm saying is, and then in Dongbei and those places you were talking about where there was lacking investment, you still have the hukou system, the family, the community system. You still have
control the flow of labor forces so that there would be put under surveillance of the police.
Well, no, but no, just that people would know one another. They would be from that community. Since you're from that community, you'd probably be less willing to commit a crime in that community.
Professor Zheng He, we don't call our country a nation of immigration. Therefore, we don't have so many illegal immigrants who tend to commit crimes in the United States, for example. Now, do you think this is likely to be changed? To look at Guangzhou, where we have more of such poor expats.
Yes, the situation in Guangzhou can be a mirror for us. As I know, the immigrants mostly from African countries came to Guangzhou.
By the way, Africans, most of them are brothers and sisters. They are friendly. They come
yes.
Here
but
the
situation here is that because when the immigrants came to China or to another country, the thing is that they don't have a registration system to report to our government. We don't know who they are, and when people are lack of the regulation, people can do things sometimes pretty crazy things. I mean, they can do things we cannot imagine in
A few years ago, reports of FBI show that every year, almost without exceptions, up to 30,000 people were killed in gun-related violence, including suicides. So do you think gun culture, which is protected by the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, has contributed significantly to the rise of crime rate in the United States, which is a pilot democracy in the world?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the private ownership of guns is one of the reasons for the high crime rate, especially gun-related crimes, and the high death toll among the people who have become victims of the gun crimes.
But just, just to play devil's advocate here on behalf of the NRA or whomever else, but to a certain extent, I mean, remember, the United States is a country that is based upon individuals as opposed to groupthink. I mean, this is at least the concept. Second Amendment was to protect the individual. When you go to places like Idaho, or you go to places in the far west, there's nobody around, there are no people around, that they look at guns as a tool. I'm not saying in where there's school shootings or anything else. Has it contributed? Sure. I mean, you don't have guns, you don't have deaths. I mean,
sorry, but do you think that the gun can actually protect individuals? I mean, the idea of the people can bear arms is to fight. They have the right to fight against, let's say, bad government. But the thing is that nowadays government has a super high-tech weapon system, but average people can only hold like pistols or
the U.S. government
guns.
has the mother of all bombs, right?
That's right.
No, I think, to make the long story short, the U.S. allowance of private ownership of gun is an exception among almost all the countries in the world. And I think, of course, the United States has very special background, historical reasons, Second Amendment, etc. But I think the United States will be better serving its own citizens if it can revisit the Second Amendment and eventually have a much more modernized way of protecting the safety of the people.
Gentlemen, I believe the most controversial issue in our discussion today is the huge amount of Weiwen budget. The budget for maintaining social and political stability is a huge, astronomical figure, and that has caused a lot of public debates as to whether this is a wise budget. I'd like to have your thoughts, Zheng Xi.
Some people say our budget put into Weiwen is more than our defense budget. I mean, putting so, but
do you believe this is more than the military spending? The Weiwen budget. Of course, we have an information deficit. No one can tell precisely whether this is more than the defense spending.
It is. I don't believe it, actually, because I think putting more money into the campaign of fighting against crime is necessary. Of course, because helping the society to keep stability, helping the people to live in a safe life, is one of the most important things the government should do. And there are always difficult between balance fighting against crimes and protecting human rights and saving money. So we should have some kind of balance. There's a scale here. If you put too much things on fighting against crime, you should lower down your level of protecting human rights. But if you put too much things on protecting human rights or overprotect it.
Well, human rights as an issue seem to have been politicized by Western media reports and politicians. For example, if we consider a safety record in a country as a part of human rights, then China enjoys one of the best in the world. Because fears of terrorism, fears of crime rate would of course be an important part of our basic right to feel comfortable, right?
Yes.
I'm protected by the government. I don't have to face the daily constant threat of terrorist attacks in the streets, cars running into the crowd, gun-related violence, lone wolves, so on and so forth. What do you think of this part of human rights in China?
Well, definitely. I think keeping people safe is one of the top priorities of any government, any part of the world, including in China, including in the United States. How to achieve this goal depends on how each government, employs its own philosophy, employs of its own resources and techniques. And China is different from the United States, definitely. But if we objectively look at the safety record and the crime rate, for example, then people can come up with very objective assessments of the situation for China versus the United States.
Netizens in Japan would say proudly, look, the law personnel, enforcement personnel in Japan will be the best, perhaps among all. And Japan also boasts of low crime rates, something we should learn from. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.